In the autumn of 1707, 4 warships of the Royal Navy tore themselves open on the rocks of the Isles of Scilly in the dark, and somewhere between 1,400 and 2,000 men drowned within sight of England, killed not by an enemy fleet, but by arithmetic. The disaster is remembered as the moment the British state discovered that its navy, the single most expensive object in Europe, could not reliably say where it was. Latitude, the north-south position, had been solved for centuries, as it can be read directly off the sun at noon or off the pole star at night. Longitude, the east-west position, offered no such gift, since the Earth turns beneath a fixed sky, and every point along a given parallel is shown the same stars in the same arrangement, merely at different moments. This in turn reduced navigation across open ocean to dead reckoning, which amounts to a running tally of speed, heading, elapsed time, and prayer. As such, the problem that would consume the next 70 years of British public life was never truly a problem of the heavens at all, but a problem of bookkeeping, of knowing at sea what hour it happened to be somewhere else. The insight required to solve it was almost embarrassingly simple and had been articulated as early as 1530 by the Flemish astronomer Gemma Frisius. The Earth rotates once every 24 hours, which amounts to 15 degrees of longitude for every hour of elapsed time. Carry a clock set to the time of a home port. Compare it against local noon wherever the ship happens to be, and the difference converts directly into distance east or west. The trouble was that no such clock existed, nor did anyone of standing believe one could exist. Pendulums are useless in a rolling sea. Brass expands in the tropics and contracts off Newfoundland. Oil thickens in cold and thins in heat, and salt gets into everything eventually. In 1714, Isaac Newton himself informed a parliamentary committee that by reason of the ship's motion, the variation of heat and cold, and the difference of gravity across latitudes, such a watch hath not yet been made. The committee heard him, agreed with him, and then passed the Longitude Act anyway, dangling £20,000, several million in modern money, before anyone who could fix a ship's position within half a degree after a voyage to the West Indies. In short, the greatest scientific mind of the age declared the mechanical solution impossible, and Parliament left the door open regardless. The respectable answer, the answer the smart money followed, was the method of lunar distances. Its logic is elegant, as the moon moves against the background stars at a rate slow enough to be tabulated and fast enough to be useful, effectively transforming the night sky into a clock that no storm can stop and no rust can seize. Astronomers had pursued this method for 2 centuries, and the Board of Longitude that administered the prize was populated accordingly by the Astronomer Royal, professors of mathematics from Oxford and Cambridge, and naval officers who had been raised on the sky. This was not corruption, and it deserves to be stated plainly before the villains arrive. An institution staffed by astronomers naturally believed that an astronomical problem would yield an astronomical solution. The method also worked, after a fashion, though it demanded clear skies, a steady hand with a quadrant, and roughly 4 hours of trigonometric labor per fix. Overall, the establishment position was neither stupid nor cynical, but it was invested, and investment is its own kind of blindness. John Harrison was a carpenter's son from Fulby in Yorkshire who had no Latin, no patron, and no formal training in anything whatsoever. By the age of 20, he had built a pendulum clock almost entirely out of wood, having reasoned that if he did not know how to work brass, he would simply use the material he did know. What strikes me most about the early Harrison is not the ambition, but the sheer autodidactic strangeness of his solutions. He made the gearing from oak, cut the teeth along the grain for strength, and fashioned the bearings from lignum vitae, a tropical hardwood that secretes its own oil and therefore never requires lubrication. The turret clock he built at Brocklesby Park in 1722 has run for 3 centuries and has never once been oiled. To the temperature problem he applied the gridiron pendulum, alternating rods of brass and steel whose opposite expansions cancel one another out. And to the friction problem, he applied an escapement of his own invention that scarcely touches the wheel at all. As provided by the historian of horology, these were not incremental refinements of existing practice, but reconceptions of it from the ground up, arrived at by a man who did not know which problems were supposed to be unsolvable. Harrison's first sea clock, known now as H1, was a brass and wood machine weighing some 75 pounds. Its balance is linked by springs, so that the pitch of a ship would act on both at once and cancel itself out. In 1736 it was sent to Lisbon and back for trial, and on the return leg, Harrison corrected the ship's master by roughly 60 miles, identifying a landfall the crew had misread as the Start when it was in fact the Lizard. The board was impressed enough to grant him £500 and, crucially, encouraged him to continue. He then did something that no rational prize winner would ever do. Rather than press his advantage, he declared himself dissatisfied with H1 and disappeared into the construction of H2, which he also declared unfit and never sent to sea, and then into H3, which consumed 19 years of his life. 19 years on one machine that would ultimately be abandoned. It was during that long detour that he invented the caged roller bearing and the bimatic strip, the latter of which now sits inside a substantial fraction of the thermostats on Earth. H4 is where the story turns, because H4 is an admission of defeat that becomes a triumph. After 3 decades of building larger and more elaborate machines, Harrison inverted his entire approach and produced a watch, 5 inches across, silver-cased, jeweled with diamond and ruby, beating 5 times a second where his great clocks had beaten slowly and grandly. The reasoning was counterintuitive and correct. A fast, small oscillator is less disturbed by the motion of a ship than a slow, large one, as the sea cannot easily interrupt what is already moving faster than the sea. In November of 1761, it sailed for Jamaica in the care of his son William, and on arrival after 9 weeks at sea, it was found to be 5 seconds slow, an error of roughly 1¼ minutes of longitude. The prize required 30 miles. The watch had delivered something closer to 1. As such, an object that Newton had pronounced impossible had been produced by a man who had never attended a university and produced in a workshop, by hand, out of stubbornness. What happened next is the reason this story survives. The board declared the result a possible fluke and demanded a second trial, which was held in 1764 to Barbados, where H4 lost 39.2 seconds over 47 days and established the longitude of Bridgetown to within 10 miles. Sent to observe that trial and to test the rival lunar method alongside it was Neville Maskelyne, an ambitious young astronomer who within a year would be appointed Astronomer Royal, who was already publishing lunar tables of his own, and who now sat in judgment over the machine that would render his life's work a backup system. The board conceded that the terms of the act had been met and then began to move the terms. £10,000 would be paid upon full disclosure of the mechanism. The second $10,000 only when other makers had produced equivalent timekeepers. All 4 machines were to be surrendered. H4 was subsequently handed to Maskelyne for 10 months of further testing at Greenwich, where it performed poorly, and Maskelyne published those results. The demands, taken in aggregate, amounts to a demand that Harrison prove not merely that he was right, but that his rightness could be extracted from him and reproduced by strangers. Here is the complication that most accounts of this story quietly discard. The board's core demand was not villainy but policy, and it was, in the cold light of institutional logic, correct. A single miraculous object in the hands of a single elderly genius is not a solution for a navy of hundreds of ships. H4 had taken 6 years to make, cost a fortune, and could not be bought. Larkham Kendall's authorized copy, K1, took 2 years and £450, and the truly practical marine chronometer arrived only in the 1780s and 90s, when Arnold and Earnshaw simplified Harrison's principles into something a workshop could produce in quantity. Lunar distances, meanwhile, remained in the nautical almanac for another century, because a chronometer that stops tells the navigator nothing, while the moon cannot stop. The real solution in the end was both methods in tandem with one another. In short, the board was asking a legitimate question in bad faith, and the tragedy of Harrison is that a fair question posed by interested men is nearly indistinguishable from persecution. Harrison broke off negotiations entirely and went over the board's head. In 1772, his case reached George III, who had H5 tested at his own observatory at Kew across 10 weeks and found it accurate to 1/3 of a second per day, and who is reported to have declared that he would see Harrison righted, though the line has surely been polished by 2 centuries of retelling. The king advised petitioning Parliament directly, and in June of 1773, at the age of 80, Harrison was granted £8,750 by an act of the legislature. He never received the prize. The Board of Longitude never awarded that prize to anyone and was dissolved in 1828, still holding it. Harrison died on the 24th of March 1776 in Red Lion Square, by most accounts on his 83rd birthday, 3 years after the settlement and a year after James Cook returned from 3 years of circumnavigation with Kendall's copy of H4 aboard, having called it his trusty friend the Watch, and having mapped the Pacific with it into the shape we still recognize on maps today. Overall, the Longitude story is remembered as a fable about genius overcoming credentialism, when it is in fact a far more uncomfortable fable about the cost of being early. Harrison was not obstructed by fools, he was obstructed by competent men asking reasonable questions for unreasonable motives, which is a far harder adversary than stupidity and a far more common one. He gave 40 years to a machine and received, in exchange, a settlement rather than a victory. And the standard he was held to, that a discovery must be reproducible by people other than its discoverer, is the standard we now call peer review and consider a virtue. What strikes me is how little the shape of it has changed. The self-taught outsider with the working prototype still waits on the committee that has spent its career betting the other way, and somewhere right now, a person with no credentials is being told to prove it again, then prove it once more, then hand it over. The question worth sitting with is not whether Harrison was right, as he obviously was. It is whether you would have believed him in 1737, a carpenter, with a box of wooden gears, contradicting Isaac Newton, or whether you would have been on the board, asking, quite sensibly, for one more trial.